The dawn broke over the Wyoming plains like a knife tearing the darkness in two. The sky was painted with fire, but on the land below, silence lingered heavy as a coffin lid. The Boone Ranch sat in that silence, its fences half-rotted, its corral gate creaking against the morning wind. It was the kind of place folks in town whispered about when whiskey loosened their tongues. "They say he ain't touched a woman in 15 years, one might mutter at the saloon. "Not since the night Death rode up his trail," another would add, lowering his voice as though Death might still be listening. Elias Boone, 48 years old, shoulders like fence posts, eyes like storm clouds. A man carved from grief and sunburnt solitude. His face had lines deep as canyon cracks, and his voice, when he chose to use it, was gravel on dry stone. 15 years ago, he'd been a husband, a father-to-be, a man who laughed loud and worked harder. Then one fever-sick night had taken his wife, and with her, every trace of his laughter. Since then, he had lived the way dust lives on wood, settled, silent, waiting for nothing. This morning was no different. He rose before the rooster, washed his face in cold well water, tugged on boots stiff from yesterday's mud. His breakfast was a single biscuit and bitter coffee. He muttered to his horse, "Whiskey," as though the beast were the only thing keeping him tethered to earth. "Fence needs mendin' again," he said, patting Whiskey's flank. "Reckon you'd be more useful with thumbs." The horse flicked its ears, unimpressed. Elias smirked, just barely. Humor had become a ghost in his chest, appearing now and then gone before he could catch it. The ranch was work, endless and thankless. Broken fences invited rustlers. Dry wells mocked him in summer. Winters gnawed at cattle until bones stuck through hides. And through it all, Elias carried on with the patience of stone. But even stone erodes. By midday, Elias was out on the north fence line, hammering nails into stubborn posts. His hands were scarred, calloused, each strike of the hammer a dull echo of the man he used to be. Sweat ran into his beard, and he swore under his breath when the hammer slipped and split his knuckle open. Blood welled bright against the dust. He sucked the wound, spat, and muttered, "Ain't no one to kiss it better, Boone. Just keep swingin', Dot." That was how he survived: keep swingin', keep movin', keep breathin'. Never stop long enough to hear the echo of her laughter in the empty house. Never stop long enough to notice the bed cold on both sides. By the time he rode back toward the ranch house, the sun was sliding low, turning the horizon molten. That was when he heard it, wheels grinding on dirt, hooves clattering, the faint rattle of iron and wood. A stagecoach. Out here. On his road. Elias slowed his horse, narrowed his eyes. Nobody visited him. Nobody had reason to. The stagecoach came rolling up in a cloud of dust, the driver snapping reins over a pair of lathered bays. With a screech of brakes, it halted right in front of his gate. Elias felt his gut tighten. The door swung open. And out stepped a woman. She was young, couldn't have seen more than 23 summers. Her dress, though travel-stained, spoke of city hands, lace at the collar, a ribbon tied neat though dulled by dust. She carried a suitcase that looked nearly heavier than her, and her face was too hopeful for this land. She looked right at Elias as though she'd been expecting him. "Mr. Boone?" she asked, voice soft but steady. Elias felt his tongue turn to stone. He hadn't heard a woman say his name in 15 years. "Ma'am," he managed, hat tugged low. Her smile wavered, unsure. I'm Clara Hartwell. I was sent here. From back east." She glanced down, then back up with trembling dignity. "I am your bride." The hammer Elias carried slipped from his hand, hitting the dirt with a dull thud. For a long moment, all he could hear was the wind rattling the dry grass. His pulse thundered in his ears. Bride? His bride? "No," Elias muttered, shaking his head. "There's a mistake here. I didn't send for nobody. Confusion spread across her face. She opened her suitcase, fumbling with papers. But, I was told, you sent for me. Through the agency. You. Agency? Elias barked. The word felt foreign on his tongue. Girl, I ain't sent for no one. Haven't in my whole damn life. Her cheeks flushed red, her voice trembling but stubborn. There must be a mix-up. My ticket said Boone Ranch. You are Elias Boone, aren't you? Elias clenched his jaw. He wanted to turn away, to ride off, to let the dust swallow this mistake whole. But something in her eyes, wide, uncertain, brave despite the storm inside her, pinned him where he stood. The coachman cleared his throat from atop the box. Storm's rollin' in, Boone. If the lady ain't stayin', she better ride back with me now. Elias glanced at the sky. Sure enough, black clouds boiled on the horizon, the kind that carried thunder and flood both. Sending her back now would be like throwing a lamb to wolves. Damnation, he muttered. Clara straightened, gripping her suitcase tight. I'll stay until the storm passes. Then I'll find my way to who I was meant for. Her voice cracked on the last word, but she stood tall. Elias rubbed his beard, heavy silence stretching between them. 15 years of silence, broken now by a mistake with bright eyes and a stubborn chin. Finally, he turned toward the ranch house. Come on, then. Don't stand there in the dust. Clara's shoulders sagged with relief, though her eyes stayed wary. She followed him through the gate, each step crunching on the gravel like the first notes of a song neither of them knew the words to yet. As they crossed the threshold of his lonely home, Elias whispered to himself, low and hoarse. Lord help me, it's been 15 damn years. The storm rolled in fast. By nightfall, thunder cracked across the plains like a war drum, and rain came down in sheets so heavy the land disappeared in gray. The Boone Ranch house, long used to standing alone against the weather, groaned under the pounding of wind. Inside, the fire popped and hissed. Clara Hartwell sat stiff back near the hearth, suitcase at her feet, gloved hands folded tight in her lap. She looked every bit like a woman who didn't belong, too neat, too hopeful, too out of place in a house built for silence. Elias Boone moved about the kitchen with the restless quiet of a man who didn't quite know what to do with himself. He set bread and beans on the table, dropped a tin plate in front of her, and grunted, "Eat." Clara blinked, then lowered her gaze. "Thank you, Mr. Boone." He stopped, the title cutting deeper than he liked. Mr. Boone. Formal. Distant. He hadn't been anyone's mister in a long time. The meal passed mostly in silence, broken only by the roar of rain on the roof and the occasional creak of the old house. Elias shoveled food into his mouth like a man filling a hole. Clara, though hungry from travel, ate slow, as though every bite carried the weight of her confusion. Finally, she set her fork down and whispered, "This was meant to be another man's table. Not yours." Elias swallowed, hard. "You said that already. But you believe me, don't you?" Her eyes searched his face, desperate for something, trust, maybe. Elias leaned back, chair legs scraping against the floor. "Don't much matter if I do. You're here. Stage ain't ridin' out in that storm. Tomorrow or the next day, maybe. Till then, you'll stay. That's all there is to it." Clara nodded, but the hurt in her eyes lingered. Later that night, when Elias banked the fire and lit the lantern in the guest room, Clara stood uncertain in the doorway. "This used to be," she began, trailing off. "My wife's room," Elias finished, voice like gravel. He stared at the made bed, the quilt she'd sewn so many years ago, colors faded but still bright enough to punch holes in his chest. "Hasn't been touched in 15 years. Sheets are clean. You'll be comfortable." Clara hesitated, her gloved hand resting against the doorframe. "I don't wish to cause you pain." "You didn't," Elias said too quickly. Then softer, "Not yet. She opened her mouth, as though to ask more, but thought better of it. With a small nod, she stepped inside and closed the door. Elias stood there long after, staring at the wood, hearing only the storm and the ache of his own heartbeat. The next day dawned gray, the world drowned in mud and mist. The stagecoach would not return for days, perhaps a week. Clara was stranded. Elias busied himself with chores, hammering loose boards, tending cattle, fixing what the storm had tried to break. Clara offered to help. He waved her off. "You'll blister them pretty hands," he muttered. "I wasn't raised soft," she replied, rolling up her sleeves. "I know how to work." And to his surprise, she did. She fetched water from the well without complaint, chopped vegetables with quick precision, even swept the porch clean of storm debris. She moved with a determination that reminded Elias of someone buried in the past. Still, he kept his distance. At supper that night, she tried again. "Mr. Boone." "Elias," he cut in, sharper than he meant. Her lips parted. "Then you'll call me Clara." He grunted, focusing on his beans. She tilted her head, studying him with cautious curiosity. "Why haven't you remarried?" The question hit him like a thrown stone. His spoon clattered against the bowl. For a long moment, the only sound was the ticking of the old clock on the mantel. Finally, Elias said, voice low and raw, "Because once you've buried love, digging it back up don't bring it back to life. It just gives you bones." Clara's breath caught. She looked away, cheeks pale. "I'm sorry." "Don't be," Elias muttered. "Ain't your business." But when he looked at her across the table, really looked, he saw the hurt in her eyes, the loneliness beneath her brave posture. And for the first time, he wondered what kind of past had driven her to leave everything behind and board a stagecoach bound for a stranger. 2 days later, he found out. They were fixing the north fence when Elias's hammer slipped again, ripping open the same knuckle. He cursed, blood dripping onto the dry grass. "Hold still," Clara said, rushing forward. "I'll manage. You'll bleed all over the post." She grabbed his hand before he could protest, pulling a kerchief from her pocket. Her touch was light, careful, warm against his weathered skin. She wrapped the cloth tight, binding the wound, her brow furrowed in concentration. Elias froze. 15 years since anyone had touched him like that. 15 years since gentleness had entered his world. When she looked up, their eyes met. For a heartbeat, the world stilled. Then Clara whispered, almost to herself, "I know what it is to lose something." Elias's throat tightened. "Who?" "My father," she said, voice breaking on the word. "And my freedom. He gambled away everything. To escape. I became someone else's bargain." She swallowed hard, meeting his gaze. "That's how I ended up on that stagecoach. A mail-order bride, promised to a man I'd never seen. But at least it was escape." Elias said nothing. He didn't know what words could answer that kind of confession. He only knew her hands were still on his, and for the first time in years, he didn't want to pull away. Clara noticed it too. Slowly, carefully, she released him, stepping back with a flush in her cheeks. The silence stretched, thick and charged. Elias cleared his throat, gripping the fence post hard. "You'll be gone soon enough. Don't go making ties here." Clara's chin lifted, stubborn light in her eyes. "Maybe mistakes happen for a reason, Elias Boone." He turned away, pounding the nail into place harder than necessary. But her words stuck like burrs under his skin. That night, as the wind howled outside and the lantern flickered low, Clara lay awake in the bed that once belonged to another woman. She stared at the ceiling, listening to Elias's footsteps pacing the floor below. Both of them haunted. Both of them stranded by fate. And neither willing to admit that maybe, just maybe, the storm hadn't brought a mistake to the Boone Ranch. It had brought a second chance. The storm finally broke, leaving behind a sky scrubbed clean and a land heavy with the scent of wet earth. The Boone Ranch glistened in the morning light, the mud drying into cracked patterns, the cattle bawling in relief at clear skies. Elias Boone leaned on the corral fence, chewing a piece of straw, watching Clara scatter feed to the hens. She moved with quick efficiency, skirts brushing against the dew-damp grass, hair escaping from its pins. She laughed softly when a stubborn rooster chased her, and for a moment, just a fleeting moment, Elias felt something stir inside him that he thought had died 15 years ago. It frightened him. He tore his gaze away, jaw tightening. He was too old for this. Too weathered, too scarred. She wasn't meant for him. She wasn't meant to be here at all. But the land doesn't care what men believe. Fate rides its own trail. That evening, after supper, Clara lit a lantern and began humming as she cleared the table. The tune was soft, sweet, with a lilt of something half forgotten. Elias froze halfway through stacking firewood. "That song," he said hoarsely. "Where'd you hear it?" Clara looked up, startled. "My mother used to sing it." Elias's chest tightened. His wife had sung it too. A lullaby from back east, carried across the plains, now echoing again in his own house. Before he could speak further, Clara smiled faintly and extended a hand. "Dance with me." He blinked. "Dance?" "There's no music but the storm left puddles singing on the porch," she teased gently. "That's enough." Elias shook his head, muttering, "Haven't danced in years." "Then you're long overdue," she said, tugging at his calloused hand. Something in her eyes, stubborn yet kind, broke down the walls he'd spent 15 years building. Slowly, awkwardly, Elias let her guide him into the small open space near the hearth. Their steps were clumsy, boots scuffing against the wood. But Clara laughed, clear, ringing, alive. And for the first time in so long, Elias found himself laughing too. A rusty, broken sound at first, then full, deep, unshackled. In that moment, the house no longer felt like a tomb. The next morning, word traveled fast. Boone had a woman at his ranch. A bride, folks whispered. Some said she was too young, too fine for him. Others said she must be desperate to marry a ghost of a man. But not all talk was harmless. At the saloon, a group of cattle rustlers nursed their whiskey and smirked. Men who'd long despised Boone for his quiet strength, for the respect he commanded without asking. "Old Boone's got himself a woman," one sneered. "Be a shame if something happened to her." Laughter followed, sharp and cruel. Elias felt it that afternoon in town when he rode in for supplies. The stares. The whispers. Clara had stayed at the ranch, but her name was already on every tongue. When he passed the saloon, one of the rustlers, a broad-shouldered brute named Cale Turner, stepped out onto the porch, grinning through crooked teeth. "Boone," Cale drawled. "Heard you got yourself a mail-order bride. Must be something, after all them years. Thought you'd forgotten how." The men behind him chuckled. Elias didn't stop walking. Didn't look their way. But Cale wasn't done. "Careful she don't run off. Women like that don't stay where it's dry and dead." Elias's hand twitched near his holster, but he kept moving. He knew their kind. Provocation was a game. But the knot in his gut tightened all the same. 2 nights later, it came to a head. The moon hung pale and thin over the ranch when the first shot shattered the quiet. Glass exploded from the kitchen window. Clara screamed. "Down!" Elias barked, shoving her to the floor as another bullet slammed into the doorframe. The rustlers were here. Elias snatched his rifle from the mantel, heart pounding. He could hear their drunken whoops outside, circling the house. "Stay low," he growled, throwing open the window shutter and firing into the dark. A cry split the night. He'd hit one. But more shots answered back, splinters flying across the room. Clara crawled to the corner, trembling but wide-eyed. "They'll kill us." "Not while I'm breathin'," Elias snarled. The standoff raged, gunfire flashing in the night, smoke choking the air. Elias fought like a man possessed, every shot fired with grim precision. But they were many, and he was one. Then, as he reloaded, a shadow loomed at the window, pistol raised. Elias turned too slow. The crack of a gunshot deafened the room. The rustler fell backward into the dirt, a neat hole between his eyes. Elias spun. Clara stood behind him, hands shaking, the revolver still smoking in her grip. Her chest heaved, eyes wide with shock. I did it," she whispered, voice breaking. "I shot him." Elias's throat closed. He grabbed the rifle, fired another round into the dark, then dragged Clara away from the window. "You saved my damn life," he rasped. Tears streaked her face, but her hands still clutched the gun. "I wasn't going to let them take you." Outside, the rustlers cursed and scrambled, their courage waning. The sheriff's posse, alerted by the gunfire, was riding hard from town. Within minutes, the outlaws fled into the night, leaving only silence and the stink of powder behind. When it was over, the ranch house lay scarred, shattered glass, bullet holes in the walls, blood on the floorboards. Elias sat heavily at the table, rifle across his lap, staring at Clara. She trembled, but she was still standing. Stronger than she looked. "Clara," he began, then stopped, words choking him. She sank into the chair opposite, the revolver slipping from her hands. "I thought I'd never be brave," she whispered. "But I was, tonight." Elias reached across the table, his rough, bloodied hand covering hers. "You were more than brave," he said hoarsely. "You were my salvation." Their eyes locked. For the first time in 15 years, Elias let the truth break through. "I thought I was dead inside," he admitted. 15 years of silence. "But you," his voice cracked. "You made me feel alive again." Clara's breath caught. Tears shimmered, but she smiled through them. "And you made me feel safe. Like I belonged somewhere." The firelight flickered across their faces, shadows dancing like restless spirits finally set free. And in the quiet aftermath of gunfire and fear, Elias Boone realized the truth he'd been running from: this woman, this mistake, was no mistake at all. She was his second chance. The morning sun rose over the ranch, spilling gold across the land. The barn stood tall against the horizon, and the sound of cattle lowing drifted through the still air. But inside the ranch house, the silence was heavier than ever before. John sat by the kitchen table, his fingers drumming against the wood, the night's events replaying in his mind. The shootout had changed everything. Blood on the dirt. Lives cut short. And in the middle of it all, a woman who wasn't supposed to be here. Mary. He looked up and saw her standing near the window, her dress torn at the hem, her hair messy from the chaos, but her eyes, steady, unwavering. "You don't have to stay," John finally said, his voice low, gravelly. "I know you didn't choose this life. You got sent here by mistake. Maybe it's best you leave before this place eats you alive." Mary turned from the window, her chin tilting upward with defiance. "And go where?" "Back to Kansas. To a man I never agreed to marry. To a life of being traded like cattle." "No, John. I'm not leaving. Not now. Not after what we've been through." Her words hit him harder than any bullet could. By midday, the town buzzed with whispers. The lonely rancher who hadn't touched a woman in 15 years. The mail-order bride who had arrived by mistake. The gunfight that had nearly turned the ranch into a graveyard. Sheriff McGraw stopped by, hat in hand. "You'll have more trouble, John." Words out. "Folks know you're keepin' a woman who wasn't meant for you. Some'll call it scandal. Others will call it theft. Men might ride in thinkin' they can claim her, or claim your land. You best be ready. John leaned against the fence post, eyes scanning the horizon. Let them come. The sheriff gave him a long, measured look. Don't be foolish. A man alone can't hold back the whole world. But maybe, a man with something to fight for can. His eyes flicked toward Mary before he tipped his hat and rode away. That evening, Mary found John in the barn, working silently, fixing a broken rail. She walked over, the sound of her boots crunching on straw. You think I'm a burden, she said softly. John froze, hammer in hand. I see it in your eyes, she continued. You think I don't belong. That I'll just bring more trouble. Maybe you're right. But you need to know this, John. She stepped closer, her voice trembling with emotion. You've been living like a ghost for 15 years. Hiding from the world. From yourself. And I may have come here by mistake, but I'm not leaving. Because maybe, just maybe, I was meant to end up here. John's throat tightened. He wanted to speak, but no words came. Instead, he reached out, hesitant, trembling, and took her hand in his. For the first time in years, the walls he had built around himself cracked. The weeks that followed weren't easy. Outlaws tested him. Ranch work piled up. Neighbors whispered. But through it all, Mary stayed. She laughed in the face of danger. She helped mend fences, cooked meals with what little they had, even rode alongside John when rustlers tried to steal cattle. She wasn't fragile. She wasn't helpless. She was fire. And John, well, John began to feel alive again. One night, as they sat on the porch watching the stars, John finally spoke the words that had been burning in his chest. I thought I was done, he said quietly. Done with livin'. Done with feelin'. I thought the world had taken everything it could from me. But then you walked off that stagecoach, and everything changed. Mary's lips curved into the faintest smile. Maybe the wrong train brought me here. Or maybe it was the right one all along. The story spread far beyond the ranch. Some laughed at it. Others called it fate. But to John, it didn't matter what they said. For the first time in 15 years, he wasn't alone. He wasn't just surviving. He was living. And as the wind swept across the prairie, carrying with it the scent of sage and dust, John knew one thing for certain. The lonely rancher hadn't just found a woman by mistake. He had found the reason to keep going. The reason to fight. The reason to love. The woman who stayed, and that, folks, is the tale of a man who thought his heart was buried forever, only to have it unearthed by a stranger who arrived on the wrong stagecoach. Sometimes, the greatest mistakes lead us exactly where we're meant to be. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Until next time, keep riding, keep dreaming, and keep believing in the power of second chances.